What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some of my own thoughts on the future of Starfield, which may seem like an odd topic to pick on a random Sunday, but there is actually a reason for it. So a few things all at once. Basically, we know that Xbox and Bethesda will be at Gamescom just here in a couple of days, which opens up on, I believe, August 19th is their opening show. So like literally 2 days from now. And on top of that, about a month or so ago, Starfield dropped one of its regular updates, which was just like some few fixes and some Creation Club stuff, but in the text of that update, they made it very clear that they are continuing to work on future updates and would have more to share soon. So a couple of things. I think it would not be unreasonable then that if there was going to be any sort of interesting announcement, it would likely be at Gamescom. And so, as a result, we won't have long to see if this video turns out one way or another, I suppose. But all of that combined got me to thinking about Starfield itself. Obviously, it's very mixed reception, and I had some thoughts to share that I thought may be worth putting out there, I suppose. So let's start with that before we start moving on to where I think the future could actually go. How I personally feel about Starfield at this point is mostly just disappointed with the pace of things like updates and addressing concerns. So when Starfield released just shy of 2 years ago, September 5th, 2023, in my own review, I liked the game well enough, but like basically everybody else, I pointed out that exploration, especially around the 1,000 planets that were effectively empty, was incredibly underwhelming, and they gave absolutely no reason, really, for you to ever go do that. That is to say, that exploration. And having all of that empty space came at the cost of their own sandboxes. So the one thing that I really like about Bethesda's games in general is the sandboxes that they create via those worlds and all those characters and how they sort of interlace together. And Starfield is bereft of that, because of the way everything is spread out across the sort of unfathomably large empty space that is outer space. That said, there are some things I really enjoyed about Starfield. In particular, the way it handled some of its character systems. I really enjoyed a lot of the traits that they allowed a character to pick that could change things, like the one where you could just have your parents in-game, the one where you could be like in debt to a house, the way they brought in the adoring fan. There was a lot of just like really good ones in there that had a significant impact on gameplay. There are also some quest lines I thought that were really, really great. In particular, the Terrormorph one. That one always really stood out to me. Probably my favorite bit about Starfield in general was the Terrormorph quest line. I also enjoyed the Crimson Fleet and a few of the more silly ones where like you meet all of those people from history in that one colony. You can find an abandoned ship floating out in space that you can learn was attacked by some sort of space monstrosity that's still in there. And all of those mixed feelings together are why I would say all the way back in 2023, I ranked it 13th out of all the games I reviewed that year, which you can see for yourself in my ranking video for them. And also, I suppose, my review for Starfield. But again, basically, I think mixed is the appropriate place for, Starfield to sit. And unfortunately, its DLC didn't really change that any. While I enjoyed the concept of meeting House Va'ruun after they were built up in the main story and everything, and that questline was interesting enough for what it was, it also didn't fundamentally change the game or add any new systems, really. It was basically just $30 for another faction questline, and that was simply too expensive for me, which is why I gave the DLC a buy on sale. And when you put all of that together, and obviously the very slow pace of updates that they have put out, I think it's pretty fair to be curious about what is in store for this game at this point, which apparently they are working on a few things at least, and the few updates we have gotten have been honestly pretty substantial. Just not enough to really turn the tide, but things like, of course, the drivable vehicles, updates to like ship decorations and all that stuff are things people had requested and asked for, but also I would say don't really address the core issues that people refer to with this game. And so when you start looking towards the future specifically, things get a little more complicated, I think, because we know that Bethesda is currently working on The Elder Scrolls 6 that is actively in development, pretty much has been since they put out Starfield, and so obviously their resources in terms of what they could potentially add to Starfield would theoretically be hampered a bit, unless there's something behind the scenes we just don't know about, which I suppose is certainly possible. Now, I mentioned those constrained resources because you take a look at another very high-profile launch that did not go to plan via CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077. They spent years and, according to their own estimates, like $100 million in fixing that game and getting it to a place they and the people who bought it were actually happy with. And that was enormously expensive, obviously took a lot of time and resources, and while I certainly think it's possible Bethesda could do something like that, it is inherently kind of a gamble. You know, what if you spend all that time and resources and still people don't really love it? Especially when the time and resources could have been spent on the Elder Scrolls 6, which, I mean, let's face it, is probably going to be a bigger release than Starfield actually was, regardless of how much people actually like it or not. So, you know, some important context basically about whether or not it's even worth it to commit that level of resources to trying to turn Starfield around at this point. But from there, obviously, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, they have nonetheless committed to some future updates and things they are working on. And I have a few different trains of thought that, again, hopefully, something like Gamescom will tell us whether or not is accurate or not, I suppose, at the end of the day. But basically, I think it falls into a couple of different camps. One, it could theoretically eventually be something like that rumored second DLC, Starborn, I think it was initially referred to as. And given the way that they were talking about updates and everything, I don't think it would have been a huge surprise that they would have had plans for another DLC drawn up, even if they did not act on them following the, of course, mixed reactions of the launch and the Shattered Space DLC. For a lot of people, I think Shattered Space kind of was the make or break moment. But either as part of a Starborn DLC, which, theoretically would have something to do with the Starborn themselves, maybe fleshing that out, but either with that DLC or as an alternative that these updates could theoretically address, I think doing something to give more meaning to the exploration and all of these empty planets would be my personal biggest request. And while I suppose other things like, even just adding more sandbox elements to the currently in place major settlements, Aquila City, Neon, New Atlantis, stuff like that, that would also be a not insignificant undertaking. And as a result, at least for me, all of the changes I would actually want are huge, substantial changes to the game that would, again, require a significant amount of resources that I just don't know if Bethesda has to spare at the moment. Especially in the face of all these layoffs and things that have been happening in the background, especially at Microsoft and Xbox as an example. Which leaves us with the other option, just continued incremental changes and improvements, much in the sort of vein of what they have been doing up to this point, while, not unwelcome or anything, aren't really probably going to move the needle much for people either. However, I suppose if that is the route you have committed to because you don't have the time and resources needed to commit to, actually addressing the bigger stuff at fault here, could be just the path they have accepted as a possibility moving forward. But obviously, I don't actually have answers to any of that, just some thoughts about potential avenues they could conceivably take. But to sort of start wrapping this video up, when it comes to Starfield and the future, while we are obviously going to get something, and I do think it'll be interesting to find out what, the other sort of side story that I'm interested in here personally is just how much time, effort, and resources are going to be committed to it. Because purely from a business decision, I would have to imagine it is probably the most efficient path to simply accept that this is a polarizing game that not everybody is ever going to be happy with, and, spending obviously time and resources on the Elder Scrolls 6 as an example and simply moving on. But again, obviously, I don't have any, wonderful insight into how Bethesda is running its business these days, and these are just kind of the paths that make the most sense to me. However, obviously, with Gamescom just around the corner and only so many months left in the year, either one way or another, we will find out what is in store for Starfield. And if those things happen to be something big, I will obviously be covering it. But if it's just small incremental patches, I might just give it a pass. I think that's pretty well where I'm going to wrap up this particular video. So I certainly hope you enjoyed it. With that in mind, I'd be interested in hearing your own thoughts about what the future for Starfield might hold, given the, again, news that we'll be getting some sort of update in the future. And more importantly, what you would actually want from those updates either way. But all of that, of course, means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.